there's a lot of debate that'll never go away on, again, we're getting married later, so we have more financial assets and debts. On this topic of combining finances, what do you recommend? It's a big topic, I'm sure.
Well, yeah. So as a coach who is also a lawyer, I like to give the favorite lawyer answer, which is it depends. And what does it depend on? It depends on each person involved in the relationship and where they are in life and in their mindset and in their experiences and in their healing and in their trauma and in their finances. There's no one factor. The thing that I recommend is most couples start with the question, should we have joint accounts, separate accounts, or a mix? I say start with how was money for you growing up? Right. Then move on to what's our current financial situation? Then what are our top priorities, both regular spending, but also longer term, right? And now that we have a vision for what we want to achieve and where we're at, and kind of some of what we're bringing to the table, both in terms of dollars and debts, but also emotionally, now what kind of accounts are going to help us achieve? For example, I have a client who's a married couple, married for over a decade, and they had historically, they get their paychecks into their personal accounts, and then they would transfer money to pay off bills together, right? So they transferred to the middle account, and that would pay household bills like mortgage and groceries, etc. And that's a very common structure. But one thing they realized during the course of my program was, you know what? That had worked for us during our relationship so far, but the goals that we have, which are involve buying a second home and taking the first one and renovating it to tip-top shape and renting it out and all of that, they realized we need some more interdependence if we're going to actually meaningfully achieve those goals, right? We got to function more as a team. And so they went and opened up another joint bank account that they could use. Now, instead of a value judgment or an abstract decision, it was like, this kind of account is going to help us fulfill on our plan and our goals and our vision, right? Make those things a reality. Just do the next right thing. Just do the next thing in service of the vision you're creating. And if that future vision involves some joint accounts, then what's the next right step you can do there? You know, you don't have to overcomplicate it. You don't have to put any judgments on you or your partner based on where you're at. Like, oh, he's not ready to share accounts with me. That means X, right? That's all constructed interpretation. That's all based on things we've seen and heard, ideas we've come up with based on that, but it's not true. And I have one of my favorite episodes of my podcast that I've recorded, which is called the Couples Financial Coach Podcast. It's the second episode I ever did with Michelle Waymeyer, who is a certified financial planner and financial coach. And it's about finances in non-traditional relationships. And she makes the point that it doesn't mean anything about how much you care about someone, whether or not you merge finances with them or in what way. That's just something we've decided as a society.
So, we did a study recently with Harris Poll and OpFi, they're a lender, and it was about financial infidelity, right? And we found out that 76% of people in a relationship lose trust if someone hid something financial from them. And what we also found is that 54% of people had hidden something. So, and that could be anything. That could be, me making, going out for beers and wings with the boys, right? Or it could be a gambling habit, or it could be another credit card, right? Or I spend too much money on the boat. So it's clearly happening. And obviously it's, my assumption is not a good thing, but how do you get couples back from that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not always easy, and it really depends on the level of the financial infidelity. The first thing is the person who committed the act of financial infidelity or hiding uh, needs to demonstrate an acknowledgement. Hey, I did do this, and acknowledge that it was outside of what's expected, right? Um, and take responsibility for that, right? I mean, maybe it's not always easy to show remorse in that spot for two reasons, right? Um, Number one, we may not really know how our partner feels about it, right? So you want to find that out, ask them how it affects them and their trust in you and the relationship. Whether you ask them or not, they're feeling it, they're thinking it. So you might as well have them say it and you can deal with it, right? And once you know how it affected them, if they're able to share with you that, right, ideally in a vulnerable way and not an attacking way, but we're not perfect, we're human, right? Uh, then hopefully you won't be too defensive, right? Because it's very easy to be defensive, like you just got caught with your hand in the cookie jar, and you also don't know how they were actually feeling, so we kind of, don't know, miss me with that stuff. No, you know what? You got to take a breath, let down your guard, ask them to share whatever they want to share, and really imagine what that's like for them, right? Kind of empathizing, and then you can show genuine remorse for how your actions affected them and the relationship, right? And sometimes the effect on them is going to be, in your mind, not proportional to the amount of money that's at stake, right? The beers, maybe we're talking about 30, 40, 50 bucks, maybe, right, kind of thing, but it's not about that, right? That's the most important step. If you don't get reconnected and admit and acknowledge and take responsibility for the impact that it had, whether that's emotional or sometimes very tangible on your finances, then that's the first piece, right? And then from there, it's just like anything else. Keep communicating, work on rebuilding that trust, work on establishing some boundaries and expectations, and continue to follow through on it, right? And if you're the partner on the other side, be open, be vulnerable, but also mind your reactions and don't just scream and yell at your partner and tell them they're a XYZ person. I mean, you could do that, but just know that's not likely to help rebuild, right? And it's okay if you find out your partner was hiding something and you're like, you know what, that's just like bottom line deal breaker for me. Okay, but then that's when you have to have the courage to say that was a deal breaker for me. I think we have to figure out how to end this relationship, right? Which typically is not happening from the beers with the guys example, right? Sure. But I just want to acknowledge there's no right way to, like, a right course to go down. The only thing is you have to be honest about it and back it up. So if you're like, this is a deal breaker, tell your partner and move on with you, right? But if you want to repair it, then you got to be willing to do that work. So sometimes that's going to involve both people getting uncomfortable. And even for the non-offending partner, they have to work on giving some grace to the offending partner. Not for no reason, but once that person's demonstrated that they are committed to this process, because they're not going to be perfect, they're going to get defensive sometimes too. It's okay. You've got to grant them the grace. But it's like both sides have to be working on themselves and trying to be thoughtful in their interactions with each other. And also to see if there's any ways that you've been enabling them to hide things from you, right? Maybe you were afraid to actually bring it up. And so you didn't ask them about that receipt you noticed on the dresser because it's bedtime and you don't want to make trouble before bed. But that one receipt becomes 5, becomes 25, And next thing you know, right, you're in a pretty serious breach of trust. But you can look at, well, was there anything I did or didn't do or could have done, right? And again, not from a place of like blaming the person who was the non-offending party. Like, no, they were the one who got hurt by this, right? It was the other person who did the thing that wasn't okay. At the end of the day, they have more of that blame in a sense, in the moral sense, from most people's point of view. But if you're committed to trying to work it out, the question is, how do we do that, right?
Right.
Well, that means if both people can look honestly at themselves in all aspects, that's only going to help the situation, right? So I just want to say, like, you're not powerless, whichever end of that you're on, right? There are things you can do to help the situation. You can't change your partner. They might change themselves, but you can't change them.
No.
But there are things you can do on your end, right? How did I allow that to happen? Or how did I treat my partner such that they allowed it to happen, right? I mean, if you're the offending party and every time your partner asks you about something you spent money on, if you bite their head off, most people are going to eventually stop asking,
Right.
right? And so now it becomes financial infidelity. Well, shoot, maybe a part of it came from that I would bite her head off every time she
Right.
asked. So let me work on that too, right? Alongside of taking responsibility, letting her speak her piece, understanding where she's coming from, setting new parameters and expectations, and working to actually hold to those so that we can build trust. And I mean, it's in those ways, it's not terribly different than how you might approach any other breach of trust in the relationship.